Mr. Speaker, when one look also at the annual maintenance program proposed by the government, those programs are a mirror of the maintenance program of the previous years. Again, Mr. Speaker, annual maintenance program will only provide the level of jobs and employment of the previous year with little or no increase. So, Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of unemployed people in this country, which I've heard a number of figures being bandied around, like 33,000. Mr. Speaker, there is no hope for those unemployed people outside there who are looking at all of us, including our side, to make representation, to create the incentive, to create innovative projects that will be executed in this country to provide jobs for them. Mr. Speaker, speaking about the young people, and not only young people graduate out of the university, but I want to speak particularly to those young people, that you're spending 5 years in the university with the hope that when you graduate from your program, that the government would have been preparing the foundation and the groundwork so that when you get out of university, you at least, when you get on the job market and you're looking for a work, that the possibility and the opportunity is there. Mr. Speaker, it is not there for those young people. Many of the older Guyanese coming out of university are very fortunate that some of them are enhancing their professional skills and academic skills, because some of them do have a job. And I'm sure that they too are worried about the young people, because many of them going to the university have children who are also starting programs while they're there enhancing their qualifications. So, Mr. Speaker, this talk about creating employment, creating business opportunity, creating a good life for our people is not going to happen in 2019, or it did not happen in 2016, 2017, 2018, and it will not happen next year. Mr. Speaker, and that is why I started my presentation on the basis that the Guyanese people has told you in the government seat that we are not happy and we do not see that good life closer to us. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention to the mining sector. Mr. Speaker, the budget made reference to our mining sector and mining and forestry sector do not exist in isolation. And you can find this reference on page 47. Mr. Speaker, but when you go through the budget of 2019 and the proposals made for addressing the mining sector, Mr. Speaker, there is little or no incentive for those in the mining sector, whether large or small miners. But I want to zero in, Mr. Speaker, a little bit on the small miners. Mr. Speaker, because their plight is being ignored. Small miners is our local investors too in the mining sector. It's not only about the service sector and other businesses, but the small mining miners in the mining sector are also our homegrown investors. Mr. Speaker, there is no incentive for small miners. Mr. Speaker, what the APNU AFC government sought to do over the last 2 years, in the first instance, they applied some increased taxes. Mr. Speaker, the next year, they were forced to step backward and to remove some of the taxes. Mr. Speaker, but what they did not do, which is affecting small miners, is to remove the VAT on mining equipment and goods that are used in the mining sector. Mr. Speaker, the non-removal of VAT in the mining sector has affected many small miners, and today they are slowly being eroded out of a stable livelihood. And Mr. Speaker, I want to also mention that in this pocket of small miners are many women also who are being eroded every single day by the high cost of fuel, by the high cost of goods and services, and by the high cost of spares for their mining equipment. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about the syndicate. Mr. Speaker, the syndicate in the first instance was a novel idea. I think many small miners agreed with the position taken by those who were initiating the syndicate. Mr. Speaker, but today the syndicate is no longer part of the solution. They have now become part of the problem again. And I'll tell you why, Mr. Speaker. I tell you why. Because the syndicate heads are now adopting the posture of large claim holders. And there are a number of members in the syndicates who today are slowly again being eroded by their own. Mr. Speaker, you know the posture of large claim holders. When they rent their lands to small miners and gold is discovered, what occurs? They usually slide them out, maybe quietly, but sometimes without any, viciously and without any compensation or any assistance for them to get to another place. Mr. Speaker, right now, a few syndicate heads are adopting that posture, and it's not good for the small miners. And we must not push these things under the carpet. We must be able to deal with it so that the small mining community will find a place of their own in this very big, vicious sector. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that small miners in Bartika and in Madhya are facing very difficult time because, Mr. Speaker, when they're awarded lands, they have not been assisted with investment to open up roads, Mr. Speaker, or making the areas that they're awarded under the 120 that was awarded in your time, and even the syndicates. Mr. Speaker, investment in roads for small miners need to be addressed. And I hear, Mr. Speaker, I hear a lot of chuckling and grumbling on the other side. But this is real. And therefore, this is something that the honorable member on the other side should take a keen look into and recommend that access to these areas are opened up for small miners. Mr. Speaker, and because I work in Region 8, definitely I will ask the minister to look into the case of those small miners who are located in the Blackwater area where they cannot access the areas that are assigned to them. This is real, Mr. Speaker, and I believe that it is in this place outside of this also, that the responsibility of the sector, or those responsible in the sector, should continue to find solutions to these matters. And we expect also that in the budget, that these are the matters that will catch the attention of the policy makers to ensure that these matters are addressed. Mr. Speaker, I also want to mention about the investment in the Regulatory Commission, which is the GGMC. I noticed that the allocation has been allocated for them to advance and to improve their core functions. Mr. Speaker, that is laudable. I don't have a problem with that. It is necessary. However, I have great difficulty agreeing with the current approach that exists. And I think that some of the investment should go towards empowering, educating, and ensuring that the regulators, the monitors, and so on, understand the complexity a little bit more of the sector. In just a few weeks gone by, Mr. Speaker, we have seen the heavy stick being used by the Regulating Commission. Mr. Speaker, miners in Madhya need to see the government or the commission as a body and as a government that wants to help them. Instead, Mr. Speaker, what happened? The miners were forced to go and protest in front of the Madhya GGMC office. Mr. Speaker, these small miners were faced with camps being burned, equipment being seized, sluice boxes being destroyed. And Mr. Speaker, you know what is even more hard and hurtful for these miners? It is that they are then charged hefty fees to recover damaged equipment. Because when they do their regulatory, policing, monetary work, they do not take care of the miners' equipment. They drag them, they drop them, they throw them anyhow. Mr. Speaker, and it doesn't stop at legal fees or charges or fines. It also extends to extortion. And this must be investigated and stopped. Mr. Speaker, I am standing here today, and I had discussions with some of those small miners. And Mr. Speaker, that protest was long in coming, and that is why I'm pleading. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, that is why I'm making a plea as we debate this budget, that investments to ensure that small miners are allowed to be empowered, that more sensitization is carried out, because these small miners cannot afford to do it on their own. So you just can't educate only those who must police them, but you must be able to educate, empower, and sensitize those who are working and making a living in the sector. Mr. Speaker, you may want to say I should stick, or I heard comments saying that I should stick to Indigenous matters. But many of these small miners are Indigenous people. Many of these small miners are Indigenous miners. Mr. Speaker, the issue of mining and how they treat small miners doesn't only confine itself to Bartika or to Madhya, but it also extends to mining in the Amerindian areas. If you look at the protest which went viral, Mr. Speaker, it was the Tushao of the Campbelltown village that took the forefront, appealing to this government to stop this pressure, to stop the backlash on people who are trying to earn a decent, honest living. Mr. Speaker, I also want to talk about what is happening in other areas. I have also perused the budget, Mr. Speaker, as it relates to the allocation for Indigenous development. There is a chapter, Mr. Speaker, which speaks to hinterland development. And in reading it, Mr. Speaker, I picked up this line: advancing the pace of development in hinterland regions. And I will wish to quote an additional line which speaks to emphasis on empowering our Indigenous people and providing business and investment opportunities. And you can find these lines on page 79 of the budget speech. Mr. Speaker, I took my time to peruse the budget, including the other associated documents and the estimates, but I have not discovered where the funding is going to be found, or where the funding is in the budget that will deal with what it speaks to. That emphasis on empowering our Indigenous people and providing business and investment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, was the minister speaking about the Amerindian Development Project, which forms part of the capital expenditure of the Indigenous Peoples Affairs Ministry? Because, Mr. Speaker, that's a routine allocation. Was the minister speaking about the ADF, or the Amerindian Development Fund, which was funded by funds from the agreement which the PPP civic government made with the Kingdom of Norway under this strategy of the low carbon development strategy? Mr. Speaker, that project is coming to an end on December 31st of this year. Mr. Speaker, was the minister speaking about capital expenditure? Because, Mr. Speaker, the capital expenditure caters for basic capital equipment requested by villages, village council, to bolster village council administration, supports for sustaining subsistence agriculture in many villages, support for transportation for residents and school children, etc. Mr. Speaker, that capital budget is a routine allocation. And therefore, I would be quite happy to see where the amount or the significant sum that will bolster, empower, and create business and investment opportunities for Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, I've already heard about the 5 projects in 5 communities across the hinterland. The crab, the crab, the crab, the cassava, the honey, the tomato. Mr. Speaker, these are only a handful of projects that will not stimulate this transformational kind of expectation which the budget, or which those who spoke before me, are trying to convey to the Indigenous people. These 5 projects, I would say, is what is expected to be done by the ministry, but that will not cause this transformation which they are speaking about. Mr. Speaker, in this debate, I wish to recommend before the 33 on that side of the House pass it through this honorable House to make sure that allocations are made in a significant way to assist in creating the businesses they are speaking about and to propel investment prospects for Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, the budget is not yet approved, and it could be done because for no longer will we accept, or myself here speaking, will accept lip service to Indigenous people by the APNU AFC government, who in their manifesto offered the Indigenous people a development way out, which today they have failed to deliver. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that if you are having a hinterland development and you want to stimulate hinterland development, I wish for someone, Mr. Speaker, to explain or to point out, identify, where is this hinterland plan? Mr. Speaker, at K, page 79, it speaks to hinterland development, but there is no plan. Where is the plan? I went through all the projects. They are normal, routine projects. There is no plan. We have some time, Mr. Speaker, with a ministry who can partner with all the other ministry or agencies to develop a plan for the hinterland. It is the responsibility of the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs to take the development of Indigenous people and at the same time support the cause for hinterland residents. Today, Mr. Speaker, we are speaking about a hinterland development, but there is no plan. Mr. Speaker, I wish to draw to your attention that the Honorable Minister of Indigenous Peoples Affairs had a 10-point plan posted on his walls of his office. Mr. Speaker, in that 10-point plan, there were a number of areas or 10-point plan of action. I want to remind the minister that going on 4 years today, this 10-point plan of action has just been a wallpaper, because I have looked in the past budget. I have looked in these documents, Mr. Speaker, these volumes, and there is nothing, Mr. Speaker, no funding to engineer the movement of this plan of action. Mr. Speaker, I am sure by now that plan of action must have been taken down from the office. But, Mr. Speaker, 10 points of action. And I want to draw to your attention, Mr. Speaker, one of this plan of action. In fact, I would like to do all 10, but I don't have the time. Mr. Speaker, here is what I want to say. Hinterland Infrastructure Extension Program. The initiative is intended to bridge the gap between the standard of living on the coastland and the hinterland. We want economic development for you. We want to see rapid economic conversion between the two zones, the hinterland and the coastland. In order to achieve this conversion, we must improve the physical infrastructure within the hinterland, where the vast majority of our Indigenous people reside. Mr. Speaker, I want to read on. And I could read on this. And I quote, Mr. Speaker, this program will be led by the paving of the road between Linden and Lethem, followed by better bridges, aerodromes, stellings, roads, ferries, and other form of transportation. Mr. Speaker, when I look at the program they have for hinterland physical infrastructure, again, Mr. Speaker, it's a study. This feasibility study for the Linden to Lethem Road has been recorded in Budget 2016, Budget 2017, Budget 2018. It also misled the Honorable Minister of Indigenous People Affairs to shout out loudly last year that we will have a paved road and a bridge across the Kurpakari. Mr. Speaker, like my colleague, Miss Yvonne Pearson, Honorable Yvonne Pearson, she's waiting to buy some precious stone earrings from Monkey Mountain. I am still waiting to ride on and cross over the Kurpakari Bridge, which was so happily announced by the minister. Mr.
Honourable
Speaker,
member, you have 5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, I want to bring to the House's attention that as we are speaking here today, December 31st, 2018 is upon us. And the Indigenous children, Mr. Speaker, have not yet received their school uniform for the September term. Mr. Speaker, I travel as an MP across this hinterland. I don't only sit at committees or come to Parliament, but I do my work in the hinterland. And as of today, they still have not received any supply of school uniform at the ministry, much less delivering it to the children. December 31st is upon us. I would like this matter to be addressed. We have all the big ministers, all those in authority. Provide some oversight to this ministry. The Honorable Head of State of this country in 2016, at an NTC conference which I attended, referred to the problem of implementation taking place in that ministry as early as 2016. And all of you on that side continue to turn a blind eye to support the ministry in its implementation of the small program which they are saddled with. It's not no huge program. It's a program that deals with a capital of less than $1 billion. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the capital budget for this year for the Indigenous Peoples Affairs Ministry has been vastly reduced by $317 million. The Amerindian Development Fund, Mr. Speaker, is a mere $702 million. 200 plus less than 2018 this year. 400 plus less than 2017. Mr. Speaker, we cannot have a top-heavy ministry, 2 ministers, 5 special advisors behaving like mini-ministers and cannot represent the Indigenous people. Shame! I'll spend my 5 minutes, Mr. Speaker, appealing to those on the other side to seriously address these issues that I'm raising here in this Parliament.
Honourable member, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Mr. Speaker, the Amerindian Act, long before they were sitting on that side, Mr. Speaker, the honourable members, they always babble about amending the Amerindian Act. We're going to do it as soon as we come in. On their campaign trail, they went to Region 7 telling them we're going to change it. Mr. Speaker, we are 2018 ending. and they have not moved. Mr. Speaker, the monies that are allocated, and I'm sorry the Minister of Finance is outside, but I hope he's listening, because the monies allocated for the amendment of the Amerindian Act is another fetch shop. It's a fetch shop, because you know what they're doing to the leaders? They're sending late notices. The leaders are coming at short notice, not having time to discuss any matter. And do you know what happened in Region 7 consultation? The leaders said to those who came in, we are unable to provide our opinion and contribution because there was no time for us to discuss as yet this amendment matter with our people. And you will have to come back. Region 2, cluster of 2 shouts, told them the same thing. Mr. Speaker, that is why I'm terming this matter as another fetting event. Mr. Speaker, $210 million for sporting. Those monies, Mr. Speaker, that we have in this budget here for festivities should go to really addressing the plight of lack of business investment in the indigenous people areas and locations.
Honourable Member, your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.